From the Center for the Study and Teaching of Writing at The Ohio State University, this is Writers Talk. I'm Doug Dangler. Liza Monroy's writing has appeared in Newsweek, the New York Times, Women's Health, and the Village Voice, among many others. Her debut novel, Mexican High, was published in 2009. She's currently the writer-in-residence at the Thurber House. Welcome to Writers Talk.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Well, you are the first John E. Nance writer-in-residence at the Thurber House, which, as I understand, it's an annual residency of 4 weeks.
Yes.
And you also had a residency at the Kerouac Project of Orlando, right? So you're sort of a residency junkie, moving around from residency to residency, right?
Well, this is my second one, but that's exactly what I'm aspiring to become. So
okay.
Thank you for
pointing that out. Yes. What does one do as a writer in residence, and especially at the Thurber?
Okay. Well, basically, residencies in general are amazing because there are all kinds of distractions in life, and they provide amazing opportunities to get away from all of that and plunk yourself down in an unfamiliar environment where your only responsibility mainly is to write. And so you feel like, well, someone has invested in you to be there, and you better write, and you better not be distracted. And
so it's guilt.
It's well, there's an element perhaps there of like in good humor, but also it's just a chance to really just be refreshed and to be inspired by a new environment and getting to know new people in the community, and then just being able to put a lot of energy into work every day and having that work just be writing. Like there's not the temptation to take an editing job or take a freelance job or just go do something social or the usual distractions of a writer's life. So it's a great place to immerse yourself. So it's ideal to go when either in the throes of a project or a new project is taking off kind of thing, and then you just can really take advantage of the time, and that's what I'm trying to do here. And Sally Crane, whose idea of the residency, the John Nance residency she's his widow, she set everything up for me, so, and I don't have a car here, so I just go downstairs and then I end up somewhere, and it's always very lovely here.
Well, tell me about that transition from one community for another. You're based in New York City and coming to Columbus. What's that been like as a transition as a writer? Yeah,
it's been amazing, and I keep saying that this is it's such a well-kept secret of a city because I didn't know what to expect coming in because I haven't been here before, and I've just found a really thriving arts community. It's really wonderful, welcoming people, and it's just been amazing so far. I can see why people come here and don't leave.
Don't leave, yeah. We trap them.
Yeah.
And don't let them leave. But it hasn't been a problem when you want to go out at 2 in the morning, like you can in New York. There's probably a lot less going on in Columbus.
Which is very good for my writing. Okay. And yeah, fortunately, these days I'm not going out as much at 2 in the morning. Okay.
So what have you been working on while you're here at the Thurber House? What writing have you been concentrating on?
So my application was an excerpt from a first-person creative nonfiction project that I'm working on called The Marriage Act. And I applied to the residency to be able to complete a hopefully final revision on that manuscript. And that is the story of marrying my Middle Eastern gay best friend for his green card when I was 22, while my mother worked for the State Department preventing immigration fraud. Mm-hmm. So there's a comedic element to it, but the deeper point of it is I'm trying to show the absurdity of immigration rights as in regards to gender-blind marriage, basically, that I could marry him for his green card and that was legitimate, but then years later as a citizen he couldn't marry his partner who was foreign to help him stay in the country. So it kind of plays with that idea of marriage rights and immigration and just the absurdity kind of not having laws that protect and benefit everyone. But that said, the narrative itself is playful, and it's the story of our journey together during those almost 3 years. And I'll be finishing that any day now, basically. I've been very productive, so I set myself a crazy 10 pages a day deadline, and I've met it so far every day, whether I'm writing 10 new pages or revising 10 pages. So that's almost finished, and then I'm starting a novel based on a modern love column that I published in the New York Times over the summer called The Profiler, about how my mother used her skills as a profiler in the State Department to apply them to my relationships. So she would say, what are you doing with that guy? He's wrong for you. And I would say, Mother, you're crazy. You don't even know him. You just met him. And then sure enough, 2 or 3 years later, we would break up. So she was always right. And I kind of gave her this project where then she could go ahead and find the right person.
Okay.
But
so she's compiling a dossier on all of the available people that you might be interested in New York?
She did, and mostly they were not in New York. And I did meet some people, but she doesn't necessarily know it yet, but she's been fired.
Oh, okay. So hopefully she won't see this this interview. We won't.
If she does, she'll know.
She'll know. She'll know. Sorry, Mom.
Yeah, but I have enough inspiration for the book now, so I don't need her services.
So she didn't know at the beginning that was part of it, that you were just gathering information on your mom to write a book.
Yeah, well, she knew. She was excited about it. She wanted the whole thing to become a reality show.
Okay. So how did she choose people? I'm curious, what were if it wasn't just geographic, say in New York City, because there's not enough, I guess, people there, what was it that she said, okay, this person in Iowa, maybe?
Yeah, she has a blog. It's called theprofilerselects.tumblr.com. Okay. And on the blog, she would write posts, whether like philosophical posts about love or specifically what she was looking for me, and she would invite applications. So the way that people found her was right after the column came out, because people read the Modern Love column because usually they're very interesting and juicy, and so it's a widely read one. So that was exciting to get to place this essay there. So I just set up a link to the article, and I talked a little bit about my mother's blog on my website because I thought it was so funny that she was doing it. So people who read the column went to the website, and some of them happened to be men who then submitted themselves to this process. And
was there an application process then? I take it there was a whole submit your application thing.
There was a list of criteria, and then there was a submit button. And yeah, she came up with a doctor, a hedge fund guy, a professor, and another diplomat.
These are some pretty high criteria.
So they were some interesting characters. So I met with each of these guys.
Really?
Yeah.
And so that's what this next thing will be about, meeting with these people and finding out what they were like, whether your mom had done a good job.
Exactly.
But
and then the whole lesson of it is that, the best things are intangible and will completely hit you out of nowhere. So,
okay. All right.
Yeah, the profiler, it's trying to make an organic process mechanical, I guess, is the best way to describe it.
All right. Well, when you're not doing things with the profiler and you're in town as part of the Thurber House, what events are you doing? I understand there's an October 24th event.
Yes, on October 24th from 4:30 to 6 p.m. I'm going to be doing a workshop at OSU. I hope a lot of people will come. I think it'll be a really great event.
Okay. Now, getting back into more about your life, you are the daughter of a U.S. Foreign Service officer, as you've mentioned, spent some of your high school years attending an international school in Mexico City.
Yes.
And I guess that's partly what resulted in you speaking 3 languages, for example, and what gives you a unique perspective on language. Your debut, Mexican High, published in 2009, covers some similar ground, right? So tell me about writing the novel.
Okay. Well, basically, ever since I went to the high school in Mexico City, I left there wanting to write a novel about it and thinking, if I ever write a book, this is going to be what it's about, because it was a very strange place. It was very interesting. Like, just there was a certain role reversal with the teenagers who went there because they were the sons and daughters of the people who ran Mexico, basically. So they had very, absentee parents, and they had bodyguards, drivers, maids, just adults at their disposal who they could tell what to do, as opposed to the other way around. Right. And in Mexico City at the time, you could bribe policemen. So basically, add all of that to kind of teenagers' natural rebelliousness and desire to explore anyway, and some pretty interesting situations and stories arose there. And just being able to say, like, okay, we're going to go, we're going to say that we're going to this vacation town, but really we're going on an expedition in the desert, or, we're going to go to these clubs until 8 in the morning and that kind of stuff.
And all of this is things you collected about other people. You didn't do any of these kind of illegal activities,
oh, no,
right?
Never.
No? Okay, good.
Well,
good.
We'll just say some of those scenes in Mexican High are fiction.
Okay, some and some are not.
The interesting thing, though, is the things that people are concerned are true tend to be the things I've made up, and the things that are indeed factual are the ones that people say, oh, this could never have happened.
Okay. So in some future version, some future edition of the book, you'll have those highlighted in a way. These are the true ones, these are the false ones.
Yeah, I would love to do an annotated version.
That's the Kindle version,
yes.
the expanded Kindle version. You recently posted on your Facebook page that, and this goes back to something that you said earlier about getting out and meeting people, but a friend suggested that you, quote, connect with people on social networks and by blogging and just put your writing out there. Something that I struggle with, struggle with as, this will sound odd for a personal essayist, memoir writer, someone who is a private person. Maybe it's that in memoir, in essay, we adopt a persona, and here, Facebook, well, it's just me figuring it out. Tell me about how you've worked on constructing a persona as a memoirist. What does that mean for you as you write?
Yeah, I think it means leaving out anything that's not pertinent to the story that you're telling, and just kind of shaping yourself into a character. It was something that one of my workshop professors at Columbia, Philip Lopate, really emphasized, just like the importance of turning oneself into a character. Just that idea that you can't, no matter what you do, everything of who you are is not going to come through on the page. So you need to really concentrate on the important parts of who is the character for the purposes of the story. So in my memoir, in The Marriage Act, I'm writing about myself when I was 22, which is different than me now at 32. So it's kind of about making that 22-year-old self believable and come alive and everything, seeing that I'm not in that stage of life anymore. And then at the same time, kind of have it developing a perspective on that from a later vantage point. So you have this separation between the narrator and the character. So they're both you, but they're different versions of you, and the present one who's writing the book has the ability to comment and reflect and think on the page about the actions of the younger self, who might just be flailing and living in the moment and not understanding what she's doing. So that could be the persona. It could be this person has no idea what she's doing. So it's not who I am now, but it's who I was then, and that's what I most want to emphasize.
How far back does it go where you say, okay, this is where the character takes over? You've got a 10-year span between you and the 20-year-old you. Do you get to say, oh yeah, that was the yesterday me that wore those shoes that I now disown? Yeah. How far do you get to construct into your own past?
Well, I mean, it has to be natural, so it can't be too much like, well, that was then and this is now. But just kind of more of maybe like if you can hint at things or have a tongue-in-cheek approach of like showing the awareness of that, you've since grown and learned without saying, and now that I'm much wiser, I see that, because that would just be bad for the writing.
2 weeks later, yeah. I'm so much better at this.
Yeah.
Now, I know that some part of this that you've written about is working through some of the aftermath of the relationship with your mother, and the difficulties that what you did might have created for her, and the difficulties in that relationship. Is that something that you've already started to write, or is this something that you're planning to write? How far have you worked through that? Yeah,
this is, it's in the draft already. Basically, along the way, when my mother first found out about this, she was, of course, livid and saw it as a personal affront and a prank gone wrong and just something really just immoral and like insulting to her given her career. But then over time, actually, through the drafts of the book, I was doing more interviews with her and trying to find out more details about what she did and about the process. And in exploring that, I got a chance to convince her of my point of view. Just happened naturally through just talking with her. And nowadays she says, oh, well, if you get arrested, at least it'll be great publicity for your book.
That's what you always want to hear from a parent. They'll go ahead, get arrested, it'll be good publicity.
Yeah, so she's come around. Now she's more invested in my my work as a writer and sees that this is what I'm doing with my life. So she wants to be supportive, even though sometimes it means me being embarrassed.
Okay. Well, speaking of your work, I think that you've got some that you've brought to share today,
yes.
Out of Wedding Cake Breakfast.
Yeah, this is Wedding
Breakfast.
Cake for Breakfast, and it's an anthology edited by Kim Perrell and Wendy Sherman, who are literary agents in New York. And the idea behind the anthology is that the first year of marriage is not all honeymoon period and bliss, but can have some real challenges. And my essay, which is called Marriage Changes Things, is it's an excerpt from the memoir. And what it's about is how, so Amir, my friend, and I who married, how we were an unconventional twosome because it wasn't a physical relationship. It was just purely emotional. It was more like adopting a brother than acquiring a husband, because we were just, as soon as we met, it was like the lost brother I'd never had. And I'm an only child, so we just had that very sibling-like connection. So given that, you'd think in marriage, nothing would change. We would just be roommates and everything would be the same. But we also had an adjustment period. So I'll just read a couple of pages from it that just gives a little flavor of what the essay and in turn the memoir is like.
Okay.
Who taught you how to wash dishes? Amir's voice boomed from the kitchen. We had barely taken the just married sign off the back of his rusty blue Sentra, and I was sitting on the black futon in the living room of our West Hollywood apartment, job hunting online while a Golden Girls rerun played in the background. A golf ball-sized lump rose in my throat. In the kitchen, Amir stood over the sink, putting the dish rack's contents back in, drenching them in green liquid soap. What's wrong? I asked. He handed me the offending plate. A faint trace of Parmesan clung to the edge. I scratched it away. Sponge poised, he reached for another dish. It's just this one, I insisted. These others are fine. Look at this place, he shouted, scrubbing vigorously. I clean the countertops until they sparkle, and you leave coffee cup rings. My clothes are hanging. Yours collect in these horrible little piles on the bathroom floor. He was right, but I balked and called him OCD. It was an attempt to deny, to myself as much as to Amir, the shame I felt over my seeming inability to distinguish cleanliness from mess. Still, he had seen my room since we lived in college dorms. He knew I was no Martha Stewart. Why was it different now that we were married? Sometime after the night, we vowed to walk each other's hound dogs and polish each other's blue suede shoes in an Elvis-led ceremony in Las Vegas. Something had shifted between us. We were too broke to take a honeymoon, and our honeymoon period was not exactly shaping up to be a state of bliss. I had expected nothing to change, but here we were, an unconventional twosome who suddenly found ourselves filling the most conventional of roles. Marriage, I thought, was not supposed to do this, not to us. But as it turns out, marriage changes things no matter what kind of couple you are. Also, we were very young. I had turned 22 5 days before our wedding in November of 2001. Amir was 8 months older. Our meet-cute story began when he sat down across from me in class back when we were film majors in Boston. We were paired on a project, and coffees, brunches, dancing, and first sleepovers ensued. On paper, our marriage looked no different from a more traditional one. All we had to do, come the day we interviewed with the Immigration and Naturalization Service, was prove that we loved each other, which would be easy because it was true. As for whether ours was a real marriage, if two consenting adults agreed it was, then wasn't it? Noticing the way we started acting after we tied the knot was what convinced me. What made us different was that Amir was gay, and I knew it when I married him. We were not physically intimate, and neither of us wanted to be. We married because he was going to have to leave the country when his student visa ran out. I did not have many friends who knew and understood me the way Amir did. He was my best friend. I didn't want to be without him, and I certainly didn't want to be alone. The real stakes were for Amir, who came from a gay, intolerant Muslim homeland. In order to protect his family and identity, it's a place I call Amirstan. He was determined to find a way to make a post-college life in the United States. In Amirstan, hate crimes against gay people were no cause for outrage. Shortly after September 11th, new prejudice against young Middle Eastern men, plus a difficult economy, made finding work which would earn him a visa, difficult for Amir. I understood his predicament. I grew up with my mother, who worked in the Foreign Service and visa sections of embassies abroad. I knew enough about immigration to realize he would likely have to leave the country if I didn't intervene, so I asked him to marry me. I didn't tell my mother. For 3 years, she thought he was my nice, gay roommate. Amir and I loved each other and offered each other everything except our bodies. At first, he worried our marriage was illegal, but he came around after I made my case for our union. Was an infertile couple barred from the institution of marriage? Couples who did not want children? What about a celibate couple who enjoyed each other's company but shared distaste for physical intimacy? What about open marriages, where both partners agreed not to be sexually exclusive? When it came to marriage, it seemed the rule was there were no rules anymore.
Okay. Tell me about your decision to write that. And I'm guessing it's something that happened after you'd already told your mom about it?
Yeah, everything I've written has been from the perspective of many years later.
Yeah. So what made you think, after you had written about the School of Mexico, your first thing that you wanted to write, you turned and said, well, there's this really interesting part of my unconventional marriage. I'm now at a part where I can write about it.
Yeah, it just made so much sense to me as a natural follow-up, even though it's a different genre, because it's Mexico City is high school, and then this is college and post-college, kind of a similar character, even though it's nonfiction. I'm a little bit of a similar character to the protagonist in my first book. So it's kind of the idea of a similar person then coming back from this life where she's lived overseas and moved every few years and grown up abroad, and comes back to her own country, but it feels like a foreign place. And so she connects with this other person who's kind of grappling to adjust to this new country and a different culture, and doing everything in a language that's not his first language. And so they bond over both. He is an international student and she feels like one. So they connect, and they share a passion for storytelling and film. And it's kind of about going through that journey of coming out of high school and college, being on your own, being independent for the first time, and really finding your first friendships of people who are going to be in your life for the rest of your years. So it just seemed like natural because it's the next life stage, so it chronologically follows. And then also it does have similar themes about identity and just who we finding ourselves and what in the cultures that we live in, and kind of this idea of the world as more of a global village than places with definite borders.
Okay. Does this suggest that your next project after the memoir is going to be something that you'll have to go out and sort of do some sort of experiential journalism again?
Well, if it's the profiler, then that's in progress.
That's right. You've got that, which is unconventional enough. I'm just curious, when you look at your life and say, how much of this do I want to use in this way? What's the next step? Do I always have to experience things in order to write about them like that?
Yeah, I think there are two kinds of writers. I call them the explorers and the inventors. So some writers can just invent and they just pull everything from their imagination, or even if they're culling from life, everything's just very imaginative, and they can write fantasy or just things set on other planets and things like that. And exploring is more about let's uncover reality some more and peel back the layers. And I think I'm more of that kind of a writer.
Okay. One of the things that your website mentions that I thought was really interesting is that you sometimes take on private clients for manuscript consultation and other writing-related work. And it made me think of you in terms of a writer. You're saying being an explorer, for example, that must impact you as a writer because you're looking at other people's work, you're working with them as more of a teaching mode. So I'm curious, what do you look for in other people's writing? What makes you say, this is a project I want to take on? How does that function for you?
Well, I think teaching is the ideal counterpart to writing because it teaches me so much. When I'm teaching, I learn so much more about writing too. So if it's, the pace slows down too much here, why is that so? What's making it slow down? Or if, the scene isn't compelling, it's just kind of sitting there on the page, what makes a scene come alive? Like it just causes this perpetual asking of questions that in turn makes for better writing. So in terms of what I take on, It's hard to say. It's more of a like, I know it when I see it kind of thing. I've never turned anyone away and said, no, I won't work with you.
Okay.
I think
that's the easier way of saying it.
Yeah, it's more about what is the person looking for, what stage are they in, and how am I able to help them. Okay. So yeah, it's not really an evaluative process, but more so, getting a sense of what it is that they need. And that's, I did hone my skills with that a lot working at Columbia University's Writing Center, because the whole process there is it's non-evaluative. You're not telling them this is good or this is bad. There's no judgment involved, and I think that's one of the flaws in the workshop process. It's what makes people become defensive. It's like, well, what's good about this and what's wrong with it? What needs fixing? It's not so much that. I think it's all about aligning the writer's intentions for what needs to be on the page with what actually is on the page. Because a lot of times those more defensive kind of critiques, it's like, well, we don't know anything about your mother's relationship with your father here. And it's like, oh, they know that, they just haven't put it in yet. And all they might need to hear is, something isn't lining up for the reader. They need more information to be able to understand, for example. So it's more about a process of questioning and having the writer decide, as opposed to, kind of taking away their ownership to judge their work. So I follow a similar model. That's
a really good explanation, I think, of the difference between writing centers and the workshop process, because we often talk about that at universities like Ohio State, where we have both of those things going on at different areas. Well, Liza Monroy, I want to thank you very much for being here today on Writers Talk.
Thanks so much for having me.
Sure. And from the Center for the Study and Teaching of Writing at The Ohio State University, this is Doug Dangler. Keep writing.